Ethan loved the simplicity of his life. At 32, he had built what he considered a dream: a modest home in the suburbs, a devoted wife in Sarah, and a rambunctious 5-year-old son named Jack who could light up any room with his infectious laughter. Ethan worked as an IT specialist from home, allowing him to spend plenty of time with his family. Life was quiet, predictable, and he liked it that way. This particular weekend, the family was visiting Sarah's younger sister, Emily, to celebrate her recent promotion. Emily lived in a cozy townhome, not far from their place, and always hosted gatherings with a flair for homemade desserts and lively conversation. As the family arrived, Ethan carried Jack on his shoulders, the boy giggling as he reached for the hanging wind chimes by Emily's door. Inside, the atmosphere was warm and inviting. The kitchen buzzed with the clatter of dishes and the smell of freshly baked brownies. Emily, ever the gracious host, bustled around pouring glasses of lemonade, her signature auburn curls bouncing as she moved. Sarah had dressed up more than usual for the visit, wearing a floral dress Ethan hadn't seen in years. He thought she looked beautiful but didn't dwell on it. She always looked lovely to him. The evening unfolded pleasantly until Ethan's attention was caught by a hushed conversation between Sarah and Emily in the kitchen. Standing near the archway leading to the dining area, he could hear snippets of their hurried whispers. "You can't keep avoiding this forever," Emily hissed. Sarah's voice was tight, almost pleading. "It's not the right time, not now." Emily glanced over her shoulder, her face pale as she locked eyes with Ethan for a fleeting moment, before quickly looking away. Sarah didn't notice, and continued speaking in a tone Ethan couldn't quite decipher. Was it desperation? Guilt? Ethan felt his stomach churn. He wasn't the paranoid type, but something about the exchange unsettled him. He was about to step into the kitchen when Sarah appeared suddenly, smiling in that way she did when she was masking her emotions. "I need to run out for a bit," she said breezily. "Just a quick errand. I'll be back in 20 minutes. Before Ethan could question the abrupt departure, Sarah kissed Jack on the forehead and grabbed her purse. The door shut behind her, leaving Ethan and Emily in awkward silence. Jack, oblivious to the tension, played with a toy truck on the carpet. Ethan took a deep breath, then turned to Emily, who was stacking plates with forced concentration. "What was that about?" he asked casually, though his voice carried an edge. Emily froze for a split second before resuming her task. "What was what about?" she replied, feigning ignorance. "The conversation I just heard. You sounded like you were urging Sarah to confess something. What's going on, Emily?" Ethan stepped closer, his tone firmer now. Emily set the plates down with a clatter and turned to face him, her expression conflicted. "Ethan, it's nothing. Just sister stuff." "That's not going to work," Ethan said evenly, folding his arms. "I heard enough to know this isn't just sister stuff. If something's going on, I deserve to know." Emily's composure crumbled. Her eyes darted to Jack, who was still engrossed in his toy, before she whispered, "Not here. Let's step outside." Ethan followed her out to the small patio, his heart pounding. The cool evening air did little to calm his growing unease. Emily clasped her hands nervously, looking anywhere but at him. Finally, she blurted out, "Ethan, there's something I've been holding back for years. She paused, swallowing hard. "I didn't want to tell you. I didn't think it was my place. But after all this time, I can't keep this secret anymore." "What secret?" Ethan demanded, his voice sharp now. Emily winced, as if physically pained by what she was about to say. 6 years ago, Sarah cheated on you." Ethan felt as though the ground beneath him had shifted. His mind reeled, struggling to grasp the weight of her words. "What? What are you talking about?" "It was with Brian, her best friend at the time," Emily admitted, her voice trembling. "It was one night, right before you proposed. She told me she regretted it immediately and swore she'd never do anything like that again." Ethan stumbled back a step, as if the truth itself had struck him. "Brian?" he repeated, his voice hollow. The image of Sarah's laughter with Brian at their engagement party flashed in his mind, now twisted with an undercurrent of betrayal. "I wanted to tell you," Emily continued, tears brimming in her eyes, "but Sarah begged me not to. She said she couldn't lose you. I didn't want to ruin your happiness, and Her voice cracked. I thought it was a mistake she'd leave in the past. Ethan clenched his fists, forcing himself to breathe deeply. Why are you telling me now? Because it's eating me alive, Emily said, wiping a tear from her cheek. And you deserve to know the truth. Ethan stared at her, his world upended, but he forced himself to remain calm. He couldn't afford to lose control, not in front of Jack, not here. His voice was tight but measured as he said, Does Sarah know you wanted to tell me this? Emily shook her head. No, she doesn't, but I can't hide it anymore. Good. Ethan nodded, his jaw set. For now, let's keep it that way. Without another word, he turned and walked back inside, leaving Emily standing alone in the chilly night. For the next few days, Ethan operated on autopilot, going through the motions of work and family life while his mind churned with questions and doubts. Sarah had returned from her errand the night of Emily's confession with no indication that she suspected anything amiss. She was her usual cheerful self, laughing at Jack's antics and slipping into bed beside Ethan as if the weight of betrayal wasn't hanging over them like a storm cloud. But for Ethan, the cracks in their life together widened with every passing moment. Emily's revelation gnawed at him relentlessly, reshaping the past in sinister ways. Was Jack, his little boy with the unruly curls and mischievous smile, really his son? The question had lodged itself in his mind like a splinter, impossible to ignore. One evening, after Sarah had left for her book club, Ethan stared at Jack, who was engrossed in building a Lego tower on the living room floor. Jack looked so much like Sarah, her eyes, her expressions, but Ethan found himself searching desperately for traces of his own features, a furrowed brow, a familiar gesture, anything. Daddy, look, Jack said, holding up his precariously leaning creation. Ethan forced a smile. That's amazing, buddy. You're really good at that. Jack beamed, his happiness lighting up the room, but Ethan's heart felt heavy. He couldn't shake the possibility that the boy he loved with every fiber of his being might not be his at all. By the time Sarah returned, Ethan had already made up his mind. The next morning he feigned a work emergency. I've got to run into the office today, he told Sarah at breakfast. But I thought Jack and I could spend some time together afterward. Maybe hit the park or grab ice cream. Sarah smiled approvingly. That sounds nice. He'll love that. Ethan bundled Jack into the car, gripping the wheel tightly as he drove. Jack chattered in the back seat about dinosaurs and superheroes, his voice a lifeline to normalcy that Ethan clung to desperately. The drive to the lab felt interminable. Ethan had found a discreet testing center an hour away, far enough that no one would recognize him. His stomach churned with a mix of fear and guilt. What kind of father does this? What if he was wrong to question Jack's paternity? But then the memory of Emily's confession would rear up, fueling his resolve. If Jack wasn't his, he needed to know. He owed it to himself, and, more importantly, to Jack, to uncover the truth. At the clinic, the process was quick and impersonal. A cheerful technician swabbed Ethan and Jack's mouths and assured him that the results would be ready in 3 days. We'll email you the link to access them, she said brightly, as if her words hadn't just fractured Ethan's world. The wait was agonizing. Ethan vacillated between hope and dread, trying to convince himself that he was worrying for nothing. Jack was his son. He had to be. But what if he wasn't? What would that mean for their bond? For their future? Finally, the email arrived late one afternoon. Ethan stared at his phone, his heart pounding so loudly he could barely hear anything else. He opened the email and clicked the link, the results loading with cruel slowness. The words were stark and unambiguous. Probability of paternity, 0%. Ethan stared at the screen, his breath caught in his throat. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt, the edges of his vision narrowing. He read the results again and again, hoping the numbers would somehow change. But they didn't. Jack wasn't his son. Ethan's mind reeled. Every memory of Jack's birth, his first steps, his first words, all of it now carried the shadow of a betrayal so profound it left him breathless. The scale of Sarah's deception hit him like a tidal wave. She hadn't just cheated on him, she had stolen something irreplaceable, his trust, his sense of family, his very identity as Jack's father. She had looked him in the eyes for years, knowing this secret, and never said a word. Ethan sank into the couch, his phone still clutched in his trembling hand. The love he felt for Jack hadn't diminished, but his world had been irrevocably altered. The boy was innocent in all of this, yet his mere existence was now a reminder of Sarah's betrayal. As the weight of the revelation settled over him, Ethan realized there was no going back. The life he thought he had was gone, replaced by a truth too painful to ignore. Before you find out what happens next, please subscribe to the channel. The house was quiet that night, the stillness broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards. Sarah sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, seemingly at ease. Ethan stood in the doorway to the living room, clutching his phone tightly, the dam of his emotions threatening to burst. He had spent hours rehearsing this moment in his mind, but now that it was here, words seemed to fail him. "Sarah," he said, his voice taut, "we need to talk." She looked up, surprised by his serious tone. "Sure, what's going on?" Ethan stepped into the room, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't sit. Instead, he stood in front of her and handed her his phone. "Read this." Sarah frowned, taking the device. Her eyes scanned the DNA results, and the color drained from her face. "Ethan," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I can explain—" "Explain what?" Ethan interrupted, his voice rising. "Explain how the son I've loved and raised for 5 years isn't mine. Explain how you've lied to me every single day since you let me believe he was." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. "It's not what you think," Ethan barked a bitter laugh. "It's exactly what I think, Sarah. Don't you dare try to spin this." He yanked the phone from her hands and opened another file. A photo of her and Brian, captured by Emily, arms wrapped around each other in a too intimate embrace. "And this? What's your excuse for this?" Sarah buried her face in her hands, her sobs muffled. "It was a mistake, Ethan. It was so long ago." "How long?" Ethan demanded. "How long did you sleep with him?" "It was one night," Sarah cried, looking up at him with desperation. "Just one stupid, drunken night. I was scared. We weren't even married yet, and I didn't know if you wanted the same things I did. I didn't think you'd forgive me if I told you, so I—" She trailed off, her voice breaking. "You lied," Ethan finished coldly. "You lied to my face, over and over again." "I was scared," she repeated, her tears flowing freely. "I didn't know what to do, Ethan, and I never cheated on you again. After that night, I realized how much I loved you, how much I wanted to be with you. I swear I've been faithful ever since." Ethan shook his head, pacing the room as anger and grief warred within him. "You had years to come clean, Sarah. Years to tell me the truth. Instead, you let me build a life with you on a foundation of lies. You let me believe Jack was my son. Do you have any idea what you've done to me?" "I know I hurt you," Sarah sobbed, rising from the couch and reaching for him. "But we can get through this. Please, Ethan, don't throw away our family. I love you, and Jack loves you. You're his father in every way that matters." Ethan stepped back, avoiding her touch. "You don't get to decide what matters, Sarah. You don't get to rewrite the truth because it's convenient for you." "But I've changed," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I've spent the last 6 years trying to be the best wife and mother I could be. Doesn't that count for anything?" Ethan turned to face her, his eyes burning with a mixture of fury and heartbreak. "It doesn't erase the betrayal. It doesn't erase the fact that you've made me live a lie." "Please," Sarah whispered, sinking to her knees. "We can go to counseling. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes, Ethan. Just don't leave us. Don't leave Jack. He needs you." Ethan's jaw clenched as he fought to keep his emotions in check. "I love Jack," he said, his voice heavy with pain. "But I can't stay in this marriage. I can't stay with someone who's lied to me so profoundly, who's shattered my trust. We're done, Sarah. I'm filing for divorce. Sarah's sobs became uncontrollable. Ethan, please, she begged, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. Don't do this. Think of Jack. Think of what this will do to him. I am thinking of Jack, Ethan snapped, but I can't be with you, not anymore. Ethan hadn't made it far upstairs when Sarah stormed into the room after him. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes wild. The composed, remorseful Sarah from earlier had vanished, replaced by someone frantic and desperate. You can't just leave, Ethan, she shouted, her voice shaking. You think you can just walk away from this? From Jack? From us? Ethan stood by the window, his back turned to her. He took a deep breath before responding, his tone flat and cold. Watch me. Sarah slammed the door behind her, her hands clenched into fists. You don't get to make that choice. Jack is your son in every way that matters, Ethan. He loves you, and you love him. Ethan spun around, his eyes blazing. Jack isn't my son, Sarah. That's the whole point. You lied to me. You stole that from me. Do you even understand what you've done? Her expression hardened, her tears momentarily subsiding as her desperation turned into something sharper. Fine, she said, her voice low and trembling. You want to leave? Go ahead, but don't think for a second you'll walk away from this unscathed. Ethan's jaw tightened. What are you talking about? You'll owe child support, she said bitterly. And I'll make sure you pay every penny. If you want to play this game, I'll fight for custody of Jack. You don't want to be his father? Fine. But the courts won't see it that way. They'll see a man abandoning his family and you'll lose everything. Your house, your savings, your reputation. Do you really want that? Ethan stared at her, his anger simmering beneath the surface. You think I care about money or property right now? You think that's what this is about? It's not just about that, Sarah shot back, her voice rising. It's about Jack. You've been his dad his whole life. How can you just abandon him because of something I did? He doesn't deserve that. Don't you dare put this on me, Ethan growled, stepping closer to her. You put us in this situation, Sarah. You lied. You let me raise a child that isn't mine without ever giving me the choice. And now you expect me to just keep going like nothing happened? Sarah's anger cracked, giving way to fresh tears. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she clutched them to her chest. Ethan, she pleaded, her voice breaking. I'll do anything to make this right. We can go to counseling. I'll tell Jack the truth, whatever it takes. Just don't throw us away. Don't throw me away. Ethan shook his head, pacing the room like a caged animal. You don't get it, do you? There's no fixing this. You didn't just betray me. You stole my choice, Sarah. You made me believe a lie for years. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? She stood up, reaching for him, but he pulled away. I love you, she said, her voice raw. I know I messed up. God, I know. But I've been faithful to you ever since that night. I've been a good wife, a good mother. Doesn't that count for anything? Ethan laughed bitterly. A good wife? A good wife would have told the truth. A good wife wouldn't have let me believe a child was mine when he wasn't. And as for being a good mother... He stopped himself, shaking his head. Let's not even go there. Sarah's desperation mounted. Please, Ethan, she begged, tears streaming down her face. We can get through this. We're stronger than this. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your forgiveness. Just don't give up on us. Ethan turned to her, his face etched with pain and fury. This isn't about forgiveness, Sarah. It's about trust. And you destroyed that. You destroyed us. The weight of his words seemed to crush her. She collapsed onto the bed, sobbing uncontrollably. I'll change, she whispered between gasps. I'll do anything. Just don't leave. Don't leave Jack. He needs you. Ethan's hands clenched into fists as he resumed pacing. The sight of Sarah's broken form only fueled his indignation. The nerve of her, to threaten him with custody battles and child support, only to pivot to pleading for forgiveness when that didn't work. It was manipulation, plain and simple. He stopped mid-step, his voice like ice. You know what's ironic, Sarah? You're sitting here begging me to stay for Jack's sake, But you didn't think twice about tearing apart the family you claimed to care so much about when you slept with Brian. Her sobs intensified, but Ethan felt no sympathy. He was too consumed by his anger, his sense of betrayal. He turned toward the door, unable to stay in the room any longer. "I need space," he said coldly. "Don't follow me." Ethan stood in the kitchen, gripping the counter as he tried to catch his breath. His chest heaved, his pulse pounding in his ears. He heard Sarah's tentative footsteps behind him and turned, his face a mask of fury and despair. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice hoarse from crying. "We can't keep doing this, screaming, accusing, tearing each other apart. Let's sit down, take a breath, and figure this out like adults." Her plea, calm and measured, felt like a slap in the face. Ethan exploded, unable to contain the storm of emotions any longer. "Figure this out?" he barked, his voice loud enough to echo through the house. "You think there's anything to figure out? Jack isn't my son, Sarah. He's someone else's child." The words hung in the air like a bomb blast, the silence that followed almost deafening. Sarah's eyes widened, her face crumpling as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "How can you say that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Jack loves you. You're his father in every way that matters." Ethan shook his head violently, his anger bubbling over. "Don't you dare twist this around, Sarah. I've been living a lie for years because of you. Every time I looked at him, I thought I was seeing my son. But now I can't see anything but your betrayal." "Ethan, please," she sobbed, taking a step closer to him. "He's innocent in all of this. Don't punish him for something that wasn't his fault." "Do you think that makes this easier for me?" Ethan shouted, his voice breaking. "Do you think I don't love Jack, that I don't care about him? But he's not mine, Sarah. He's not mine, and I can't—" He cut himself off, his breath hitching as the weight of his words crushed him. Sarah reached out, her hand trembling. "We can get through this," she said desperately. "I'll leave if you need time, but don't shut us out completely. Don't throw away the family we've built." Ethan's gaze hardened, his resolve crystallizing. "You should have thought about our family before you decided to destroy it." He stepped back, his tone colder than ever. "I don't want to see you or Jack in this house. Pack your things and leave." Sarah gasped, the finality of his words hitting her like a physical blow. "You don't mean that," she whispered, shaking her head. "I do," Ethan said, his voice like ice. "I mean every word. I can't look at you without seeing what you've done, and I can't look at Jack without feeling like my entire life has been a lie." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she nodded shakily, her shoulders slumping in defeat. She turned and hurried upstairs, her sobs echoing through the house as she gathered a bag for herself and Jack. Ethan stood in the kitchen, staring at the floor, his fists clenched so tightly, his nails dug into his palms. When Sarah came back down, Jack was holding her hand, confused and scared. "Where are we going, Mommy?" he asked, his small voice breaking Ethan's heart all over again. "We're going to stay somewhere else for a little while," Sarah said, her voice trembling as she tried to smile through her tears. Jack looked up at Ethan, his wide eyes full of worry. "Daddy, are you coming?" Ethan couldn't bring himself to respond. He turned away, unable to face the boy who had once been his entire world. "Say goodbye to Daddy, sweetheart," Sarah said softly, her voice cracking. "Bye, Daddy," Jack said hesitantly. Ethan didn't answer. He stood frozen as the front door opened and closed, leaving behind an unbearable silence. Ethan sat on the edge of the couch, staring at nothing. The house, once filled with Jack's laughter and Sarah's cheerful chatter, felt like a tomb. The quiet was suffocating, every creak of the floorboards a reminder of the emptiness. He buried his face in his hands, the weight of everything crashing down on him. The boy he had raised, the wife he had loved, they were gone, and he had pushed them away. But what choice did he have? Staying would have meant pretending, living a life built on lies. Still, the pain was excruciating. The house, filled with memories of birthdays and bedtime stories, now felt alien. He thought of Jack's little voice asking if he was coming with them, the confusion in his eyes. Ethan clenched his fists, guilt and anger battling within him. He couldn't do this alone. The realization struck him with startling clarity. He needed help, someone to talk to, someone who could help him make sense of the chaos his life had become. The next day, Ethan decided to visit his parents. Ethan parked his car in the familiar driveway of his childhood home. The house was modest, with a white picket fence and a carefully tended garden, just as it had always been. He hesitated for a moment, staring at the front door. Reaching out for help wasn't something he was used to, but right now, he couldn't imagine getting through this without his parents' support. As he stepped inside, the smell of his mother's baking greeted him, a comforting scent of cinnamon and apples. His mother, a petite woman with silver-streaked hair, appeared from the kitchen and smiled warmly. "Ethan, sweetheart, I'm so glad you came," she said, pulling him into a hug. Ethan hugged her back tightly, grateful for the familiarity. His father entered the room, his tall frame filling the doorway. A retired mechanic with a strong build and a steady presence, his father had always been Ethan's source of strength. "Hey, son," his father said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Your mom told me you were coming over. Sit down, let's talk." They settled in the living room, the air filled with a quiet tension. Ethan hadn't told them the full story over the phone, only that his marriage had fallen apart. Now, with his parents' expectant eyes on him, he took a deep breath and began. He told them everything, about Sarah's affair, the DNA test, and the fallout. His voice broke more than once, but he pressed on, laying bare the betrayal and the loss that consumed him. When he finished, his mother's eyes were brimming with tears. She reached out to take his hand. "Oh, Ethan," she said softly, "I can't imagine how much this hurts." His father's expression was grim, his jaw set in a hard line. "You're doing the right thing," he said firmly. "I know it's painful, but you don't owe Sarah anything after what she did. And as for Jack—" He hesitated, his voice softening. "You gave that boy everything you had, Ethan, but you can't live a lie. Raising someone else's child, especially under these circumstances, it's not fair to you." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. I feel like I'm abandoning him. He didn't ask for any of this." "You're not abandoning him," his father said, his voice steady. "You're stepping away from a toxic situation. That's not the same thing. You can't sacrifice your own well-being for a life Sarah built on lies." His mother squeezed his hand. "We're here for you, Ethan. Whatever you need." Ethan looked at them, the love and support in their eyes bringing a flicker of warmth to the cold void inside him. "Thanks," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. A few days later, Ethan found himself in a quiet office, the soothing scent of lavender in the air. Across from him sat Dr. Harper, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a patient demeanor. She wore a simple cardigan and held a notepad, though she seemed more focused on him than on her notes. "Ethan, I know this is new and probably uncomfortable," Dr. Harper began, "but take your time. Share whatever feels most important to you." Ethan hesitated, staring at the patterned rug beneath his feet. "I don't even know where to start," he admitted. "Start wherever you want," she said gently. "This is your space." He took a deep breath, then began recounting the events of the past weeks. His voice was steady at first, but as he spoke of the DNA test and Jack's paternity, it cracked with emotion. "I loved that boy," Ethan said, his hands clenching in his lap. "I still do, but every time I think about him, all I see is Sarah's betrayal. It's like she's tainted everything, every memory, every moment." Dr. Harper nodded. "It's natural to feel that way. Betrayal like this cuts deeply because it shakes the foundation of your life, your sense of trust, of reality. But tell me, Ethan, what do you want for yourself moving forward?" Ethan was silent for a long moment, staring at his hands. "I want the pain to stop," he said finally. "I want to feel like myself again. I want to rebuild, but I don't even know where to start." Dr. Harper leaned forward slightly, her voice calm. "Healing takes time, Ethan. It's okay to not have all the answers right now. What's important is that you're here, taking the first steps. And from what you've told me, it sounds like you have a strong support system. That's a good foundation to build on." Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. I just feel broken, like I'll never be whole again. You're not broken, Dr. Harper said firmly. You're hurt, and hurt can heal, even if it doesn't feel that way right now. Her words struck a chord, a small glimmer of hope breaking through the darkness. That evening, Ethan sat alone in his house, the emptiness still heavy but no longer suffocating. The conversation with his parents and the therapy session had stirred something within him, a faint but growing determination. The pain was still there, raw and unrelenting, but for the first time, Ethan felt a sense of clarity. He couldn't change the past, but he could choose how to move forward. The days following Sarah and Jack's departure were a blur of emotions and encounters, each one more complicated than the last. Ethan found himself fielding questions and unsolicited opinions from friends, colleagues, and even strangers online. Each interaction chipped away at his resolve, or fortified it, depending on the source. Ethan's close friend David, a no-nonsense type with a knack for brutal honesty, was the first to weigh in. They met for coffee after work, the usual casual banter replaced by a serious undertone. You did what you had to do, man, David said firmly, stirring his black coffee. She lied to you for years. That's not something you just get over. But Jack, Ethan said, his voice trailing off as guilt twisted in his chest. Jack will be fine, David replied. You're not abandoning him. You're stepping out of a toxic situation. There's a difference. David's words reassured him momentarily, but the next day brought a more stinging conversation with Lisa, a colleague he'd known for years. Look, I get it. You're hurt, Lisa said during a lunch break. But Jack didn't ask to be born. He didn't ask for any of this. Walking away from him feels harsh, Ethan. He sees you as his dad. Ethan tightened his grip on his sandwich, his appetite gone. It's not that simple, Lisa. You don't know what it's like to have your entire life turned upside down. No, I don't, she admitted. But I know what it's like to feel abandoned, and I know what that can do to a kid. The conversation lingered in Ethan's mind, adding to the weight of his doubts. That night, alone in the quiet house, Ethan turned to the internet for solace. He typed out his story on a forum dedicated to relationship struggles, making sure to keep it anonymous. The post was long and raw, detailing Sarah's betrayal, the DNA test, and his decision to end the marriage. Responses poured in within hours, and the comments were a cacophony of opinions. One commenter wrote, "You're doing the right thing. No one should be forced to live a lie, especially one this big. You're protecting your own mental health, and that's valid." Another said, "I get that Sarah messed up, but Jack is innocent. He loves you, and you're the only father he knows. Leaving him will hurt him more than anyone." Others were harsher. "You're abandoning a child. DNA doesn't make you a dad. Love does." But there were those who fiercely defended him. "Don't listen to the guilt trippers. You've been lied to and manipulated for years. You have every right to walk away." Ethan scrolled through the comments late into the night, each one adding to the storm in his mind. The supportive voices felt like a balm, while the critical ones stung like salt in a wound. The conflicting opinions only deepened Ethan's doubts. He spent hours replaying memories of Jack's first steps, their father-son adventures, and the bedtime stories they had shared. Those moments felt real, but now they were overshadowed by the betrayal that had poisoned them. How could he continue being a father when the very premise of their relationship was a lie? Ethan made his decision. He couldn't undo the past, but he could refuse to live a lie any longer. He would carry the pain, but he would not compromise his integrity. He closed his laptop and stared at the faint reflection of himself in the window, his jaw set with quiet determination. "I won't let this define me," he whispered. "I deserve better." Ethan sat across from his lawyer, Amanda Gray, in her sleek minimalist office. The weight of the impending legal fight was heavy on his shoulders. Amanda, a seasoned family law attorney, radiated confidence as she reviewed his case. "You've made the right decision coming to me," Amanda said, tapping her pen against the folder on her desk. "But I won't sugarcoat it, Ethan. This is going to be a challenge. Family courts tend to favor the mother, and the presumption of paternity complicates things. Ethan frowned. What does that mean exactly? It means, Amanda explained, that because you were married to Sarah at the time of Jack's birth, the law assumes you're his father, even if the DNA test says otherwise. It's a deeply entrenched principle meant to protect children, but it can work against you in cases like this. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the enormity of the situation sinking in. So, what do we do? Amanda gave him a steady look. We fight. We'll present the DNA test as evidence, argue your case, and push for a fair settlement. But you need to prepare yourself. This won't be easy. The weeks leading up to the court date were grueling. Ethan provided Amanda with every piece of information she needed. He hoped that the truth would sway the court in his favor. But as the proceedings began, it became clear that the legal system wasn't as straightforward as he had hoped. Sarah's lawyer leaned heavily on the presumption of paternity, painting a picture of Ethan as Jack's father in every meaningful sense. Jack knows no other father, the lawyer argued, and forcing Mr. Trenton to sever that relationship will cause irreparable harm to the child. Amanda countered with evidence of Sarah's deception and the DNA test, but the judge seemed torn, balancing the child's best interests against Ethan's rights. The courtroom debates were exhausting, each session leaving Ethan more drained than the last. As the case dragged on, it became clear that a compromise was the only way forward. Amanda sat with Ethan in a private meeting room, outlining the terms Sarah's legal team had proposed. They're willing to concede on child support, Amanda said, her voice measured, if you agree to give up the house and split your finances equally. Ethan's jaw tightened. The house? I worked for years to afford that place. Why does she get it? She's arguing it's in Jack's best interest to stay in the home he's known, Amanda explained. And frankly, Ethan, the courts are likely to agree. If you fight this, you risk being ordered to pay child support despite the DNA test. This compromise protects you from that. Ethan stared at the table, his anger bubbling beneath the surface. It felt like losing, again. But Amanda's words cut through his frustration. This outcome is better than most men in your position could hope for, she said gently. You won't be tied to Sarah or Jack financially. You'll have a clean slate. After a long silence, Ethan nodded. Fine, let's do it. The final day in court was a blur. The judge approved the settlement. Sarah would keep the house, the financial savings would be divided evenly, and Ethan would have no obligation to pay child support for Jack. As Ethan stepped out of the courthouse, the weight of the decision settled over him. Amanda joined him on the steps, her expression sympathetic but firm. You did well in there, she said. It's not perfect, but it's fair given the circumstances. Fair? Ethan said bitterly. I lose my house and half my savings because of her lies, and I'm supposed to feel good about that? Amanda placed a hand on his shoulder. I understand how you feel, but you're free now, Ethan. You're not tied to Sarah, and you're not tied to a child that isn't yours. That's a victory in its own way. Ethan looked out at the busy street, the noise of the city swirling around him. The outcome wasn't what he had hoped for, but Amanda was right. It was time to let go of the anger, the betrayal, and the pain. He took a deep breath, ready to start over. A new chapter awaited him, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of hope. Ethan's new life began with a U-Haul and a modest one-bedroom apartment in a city 3 hours away. The fresh start was both liberating and daunting. The apartment, though small, was clean and quiet, with large windows that let in the morning light. It wasn't much, but it was his, a space untouched by the ghosts of his old life. He found a new job as a systems analyst for a mid-sized tech firm. The office was modern and bustling, filled with people who had no idea about his past. This anonymity was exactly what Ethan needed. He could be whoever he wanted here, free from the judgment and pity that had weighed on him in his old life. Among his new colleagues was a woman named Nicole. She was in her early 30s, with warm brown eyes and an easy smile that made her approachable. Nicole worked in the marketing department, and their paths often crossed during meetings. It started with small talk, conversations about work, the best coffee spots in the area, and shared laughs over office quirks. Nicole's interest in Ethan was clear, but she didn't push. She seemed to sense that he was guarded, giving him space while still making her feelings known. Ethan found himself drawn to her. She was kind and thoughtful, with a sense of humor that made him laugh despite himself. But every time he felt the pull toward her, the scars of his past held him back. One evening after work, Nicole caught him in the parking lot. "Hey," she said, her voice light but tinged with nervousness. "A bunch of us are grabbing drinks at the bar down the street. You should come." Ethan hesitated, but her hopeful expression made it hard to say no. "Sure," he said, forcing a small smile. The evening was fun and relaxed, with coworkers sharing stories and joking over pints of beer. Nicole sat beside Ethan, her presence comforting. For the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of something resembling happiness. But as the night wore on, the weight of his past pressed down on him. He excused himself early, leaving Nicole with a puzzled but understanding look. Back at his apartment, Ethan stared at the city lights through his window. He liked Nicole, but the fear of getting hurt again loomed large. He wasn't sure if he was ready to open his heart yet, or if he ever would be. Meanwhile, Sarah was also navigating her new reality. Emily had been a constant source of support, helping Sarah rebuild her life and providing a shoulder to lean on. But even with Emily's help, the weight of her choices lingered. One evening, as Sarah tucked Jack into bed, he looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes. "Mommy, where's Daddy?" he asked softly. "Why doesn't he come to see me anymore?" Sarah's heart sank. She had known this question would come eventually, but that didn't make it any easier to answer. "Honey," she said, stroking his hair, Ethan isn't your real daddy. He loved you very much, but he had to go away. He's not coming back." Jack's brow furrowed in confusion. "If he's not my daddy, who is?" Sarah's throat tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. "You don't have a daddy right now," she said gently. "But you have me, and Aunt Emily, and so many people who love you." Jack didn't say anything for a long moment, his small face scrunched in thought. Finally, he whispered, "I miss him." Sarah's tears fell silently as she hugged him tightly. "I know, sweetheart. I know." As the weeks turned into months, both Ethan and Sarah worked to rebuild their lives. Ethan threw himself into his new job, slowly building friendships with his colleagues. Nicole continued to show interest, and while Ethan kept things slow, he appreciated her patience and understanding. Sarah, on the other hand, focused on being the best mother she could be for Jack. Emily's presence was a lifeline, helping her navigate the challenges of single parenthood. Their lives had diverged completely, each on a path shaped by the choices and consequences of the past. For Ethan, the road ahead was uncertain, but he was determined to move forward, step by step, day by day. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to the channel. I wish you a great mood and good luck.